Hey there, YouTube. Welcome to Big Mike Beard Wisdom. So today we're wrapping up the work that I was doing on the Astra, and basically we've already installed the oil cooler. Now we're gonna get the intake manifold, and now we're gonna get the exhaust manifold on. So first things first, got to remove the old gasket and make sure the sealing surface is nice and clean. You can see this is all kind of rusty and nasty. That's kind of dirty and nasty, but we can clean that off real quick. I just got that scuffed up a little bit, nice and clean with a green scratch Sprite and a little bit of brake clean. Now we need to take a look at the manifold. So the manifold, I'll just do like a little bit of light cleaning here just to make sure I knock some of the rust off. The new gasket's a metal gasket, so doing all this doesn't make a whole lot of difference, but I'd rather have clean surfaces going to clean surfaces. The bigger problem we have is this. So when I went to take this loose, we had some stuff come off nice and easy. Some stuff broke. When I went to take the bottom pipe loose, all the bolts and the studs and nuts were super rusty. You can see this one came off. So the nut came off and the stud's still there. It looks okay, but it's not super pretty. This stud snapped right off, and this stud came right out. So I soaked this down pretty good with some rust penetrant. And what I'm going to try and do is take those bolts out, or the studs out. Oh, and just in case, if you've never seen like the inside of a catalytic converter, that's what it looks like. There's the honeycomb. But I was pretty much able to figure out that these are like M8 by 125 studs. And I picked some up at the local parts store in a couple different varieties just to be safe. For the way the exhaust went, the exhaust manifold nuts are 10 millimeters. But I had a little bit of trouble with some of them because some of them were so rusted that they kind of just rounded off. I was still able to get them to come off, but I'm going to wind up replacing these. These are also M8 by 125. Here's the exhaust stud that came out. All right, you can see there is no real thread left. It's pretty much rusted away. So I can either use this as a bolt to go up in, or I can just rerun a new stud in. And then this was one of the exhaust nuts that came off easy. And then this one here, that's the exhaust manifold. So one of the exhaust manifolds did kind of the same thing where it pulled the stud clean out of the head. So this one here can be used just like a bolt as well, because this one has like a decently shaped one, but I may wind up, putting a different stud in there. I don't know yet. And then here's pretty much everything that I bought. So just to be on the safe side, I bought a set of washers. Then this exhaust manifold stud kit had the studs about the length that I was looking for, but I don't really like those nuts. Then this one, for this exhaust manifold kit, this one's got really long studs, but it's got nice nuts with a nice collared end. So that way this should be, theoretically better than those. And then I also picked up some of these flanged ones to use on the manifold. So I'm kind of spoiled with the tools that I have from being a tech for so long. And a lot of people probably like, well, just throw a set of vice grips on there. Well, these Parrot Beak pliers are amazing. And they do a tremendous job of gripping. So, thanks to the pair of Beak pliers, I was able to get that broken stud gripped tight enough that I was able to get it broken loose and pulled out. And now all I have to do is just run a new stud in its place, and we should be about good to go. So, let's say that you couldn't get this out. Another trick that you can do is just take a bigger nut. So a nut large enough that'll fit over this. And then just weld this stud to that nut. And then a lot of times the heat from welding it will help break the stud loose. But also, it also gives you a much larger gripping surface. So instead of having just this little teeny tiny gripping surface here, you've now got a larger nut. So like this, I would assume would be at least, ½ inch. Whereas what I'm holding is probably just 1/4 of an inch. So it would greatly increase the amount of area that you're gripping onto and the amount of force that you can apply to this. And it's something that I've used quite a good bit in the past, especially for like a broken bolt. So broken bolts are pretty easy too, in that like with a stud, you've got this long section where there's no actual threads. But with a bolt, you've got a small threaded section. We can still thread on a nut for that particular thread pitch on the bolt where it broke. And if you can, it really makes the welding process a lot easier because then everything's perfectly straight. Because if the nut's a little crooked or cockeyed, sometimes it makes pulling it a little bit awkward and a little bit more difficult. Because then you can wind up actually, as you go to turn it, you can wind up just snapping the weld. Because instead of applying force in a nice around direction, you're now going like around to the side a little bit. So if you do want to weld the nut on, you want to make sure you're about as square as possible, nice and straight. That way any force you apply to it is purely rotational to get the bolt out. For the most part, studs are pretty simple to install. So I just have the stud started a thread in there. You can kind of see here's a shoulder. And I used the 2 nuts I'm not planning on using and ran them both together. By running them both together, it creates a point at which I can just grab onto real quick and tighten the stud into. And essentially all I'm going to do is just run it in until we get down to that shoulder. And I should be good to go ahead and install the manifold on the top. And then we'll tackle stuff from down below. I got most of the bolts in up here, or most of the nuts, including the one stud. And what I did was I basically reconditioned the nuts a little bit. So if we take a look at this one's one that I more or less damaged and probably can't fix up. But you can kind of see that just the little bit, maybe 1/4 of the flat is rounded over. That's because that's about as far as I could get the socket on. So the rust caused the nut to swell up enough that it wasn't able to get all the way on. So what I did with all the remaining ones is I basically took a little bit of a file to it and knocked the rust area back. That way I've got nice clean flats to torque against. And I don't need to worry about accidentally stripping them, hopefully. All those are tightened up. And then I added the exhaust one there. So that's a 13mm, a little bit different size, but about the same size as far as like the washer end of it, so the flat end. With the top bolts tight, bottom bolts tight, it was amazing how easy the heat shield just kind of fell in place, but I also had a whole bunch of stuff kind of out of the way already. So before I was fighting with a few things, this time I didn't need to. So I went ahead and installed the variable valve timing solenoid in place. Because last time I seem to remember I was hitting it and fighting with it. So that might be part of the reason why it went so easy, but now we've got the new one of these in. We're pretty much done with the exhaust, as far as I'll take it. There's some welding I need to do on the bottom part in order to finish that one up, but I've got everything put back in place. So this bracket goes right here. I almost forgot that the dipstick bolts in right there. And then I've got this installed with its clip. And the big thing is that while you're doing this, a lot of times like the harnesses get kind of old and the plastic will break. Go ahead and wrap that up That way you know that it's nice and safe now. So don't be like, oh, well, I'll get to it later, because, you know, sometimes that doesn't happen. But if you do it now, at least it's all said and done. And you don't have to worry about a weird short to ground, short to power kind of situation later on, and getting a weird check engine light that could have been completely preventable had you just wrapped the harness back up. Alright, so everything's all back together. Everything's about ready to go. Except the exhaust is still taken loose. But if you're like me, you're kind of curious as to what that sounds like. So with the downpipe still disconnected down there, we're going to fire it up real quick just to make sure the timing's okay and to get a little bit of heat to hopefully get some of the coolant moving just a touch. I've got the GoPro set up. That way we're able to see just how loud it's going to want to be in. But if you're like me, you're kind of curious as to what that sounds like. So with the downpipe still disconnected down there, we're going to fire it up real quick just to make sure the timing's okay. So we had what looked like a little bit of smoke, and more than likely, it's just some of the oils and stuff burning off that was in and around the exhaust. That was a little bit higher pitched than I thought it was going to be. But at least we're mostly done. Now I just have some welding to do in order to help fix these exhaust leaks. Hope you guys enjoyed the video. Feel free to like and subscribe, and I'll check you next time. So sleepy. Just kidding. The garage door was open.